Afternoon, and thank you for joining us here for this meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board. And we will call this meeting to order, and can we get a roll call?
Chair Johnson,
Here.
Supervisor Wilson,
Present.
and you're attending using a just cause.
I am.
Thank you. Mayor Sawatsky,
Here.
Mayor Burgell,
Here.
Mayor White,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny,
Here.
Councilmember Woodall, PAC Member Arroyo, PAC Member Allstrand.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And our first item of business is to adjourn as the HCOG Board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory
Chair
Committee.
Johnson,
Oh,
can I
yes.
ask a procedural question?
Yes.
I know that when we have a member attending on Zoom in council, we have to approve them coming into the meeting. Is that the same for HCOG or is that a different process? Okay, then it's a different process. Welcome there, Mike Wilson.
Thanks for approving me or not.
We'll accept you. And we'll accept you as a part of the board, as another Mike. All right, so we are reconvening as the Policy Advisory Committee, and our first item is public comment on non-agenda items. If there's any public comment on items not on today's agenda, this is the time for that. And I don't see any at this time. So we come now to the consent calendar, and we have 4 items: approval of the meeting record, approving the Transportation Development Act Local Transportation Fund apportionment, approving HTA's LTF claim, and consultant selection for the pavement management program. Does anybody on the board have any items they'd like to pull?
I don't have one I'd like to pull, but is it permissible to ask a question about an item? Just
Absolutely.
A quick question. Okay. Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was on D, item D, I noticed in the report that it said that the chosen contractor will do 100% of the roads while the others only offer to do single lanes of multi-lane roads. And just out of curiosity, I'm wondering, did you actually check with the chosen contractor to make sure you understood them to be saying they would do more than one lane of multi-lane roads? Or
Yeah.
just out of curiosity.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There's a lot of approaches for how people do these types of inspections, and some contractors, especially when budget constrained, will propose a method where they do like 50%, or they'll do one lane and they'll, extrapolate that to be the whole roadway. This particular contractor, their approach, they can do 100% for that. I will also note they're the contractor that's completed the work the previous number of times for HCOG, so it's consistent with the method that they've used in previous
Prior
inspections.
experience. Yeah, great, thank you. That was all I had.
Thank you. And is there any public comment on the consent calendar? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I would ask if Mr. Wilson could cast his vote loudly and following our vote here. So we'll take a vote on this. We're all in favor?
Aye.
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 And opposed? None? Well, thank you very much. So we move now to action items. The first one being the draft fiscal year 26-27 OWP and budget.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. So, as the board is aware, this is our first step in our annual budgeting process, which for HCOG includes the budget itself, but also what we call the overall work program. So that's kind of like the working directive that shows all of our projects and work elements that HCOG staff will be working on. We bring this as a draft to the board in February. Our draft submittals are due to Caltrans for review by March 1st. We usually get comments back in the spring, and this should be coming back as a final budget either in May or June. So I will be brief with this one, but encourage any questions the board has afterward. But I'll just highlight some of the key differences year over year. So between the current fiscal year's budget and the proposed fiscal year budget, the work elements largely remain the same. We do have a lot of ongoing projects that we have continued activity in. I will note some of those projects hopefully will be coming to a close early in the next fiscal year, but they are kept in there. Those include our Vision Zero action plan, our hydrogen siting analysis, our fleet transition plan, among a few others. In addition to that, there is some reduction in some of the budgeted staff time in our work program or our work element that supports the RTP update, which we're currently doing. Of course, that'll go away next year, so we don't need quite as much staff time there. Additionally, we do have a reduction in our work element, which we performed RENA work through, because of course we anticipate being completed with RENA work at the end of this fiscal year. Outside of that, one of the only other major changes are two staff changes that I would highlight in here, proposed staff changes. The first is, and the board may recall that in the previous budget, there was $200,000 of HCOG reserve funds set aside for the potential of a climate program manager that would enact the RCAP at HCOG. We have removed the use of reserve funds in this fiscal year budget. As the board is aware, regionally, the local agencies have been discussing with HCOG local agency funding through a collaborative MOU that would fund a position either at HCOG or potentially at RCEA. So I do want to be clear, although it's a reduction in the budget in here, it's just the reduction of the reserve budget. All the discussions about the regional funding and where that position will land is still, of course, very, very much on the table. The other staff change we are proposing as part of this budget is to reclassify our associate planner to a senior planner position to recognize their years of professional experience and their ability and, quite frankly, the level of work that they are being asked to do in their position. So with that, we are projecting next fiscal year's budget and this draft budget to be about $27,000 higher in staffing costs, with the desire to present a balanced budget that doesn't take any more of the available LTF funding and doesn't use HCOG reserve funds. We've balanced that increase in staffing costs by going through some of our overhead budget categories and thinking a bit more critically about some of those budget items. So I'm happy to note that this draft budget achieves that. We have offset that, and we're not using any additional LTF funds beyond what we've conventionally used over the last couple of years. And we do actually anticipate this coming year, after we complete our pavement management plan, that we will be able to reduce our take from the LTF for a handful of years. So with that, I'm happy to hand it back to the board for discussion. But again, we are looking for approval so we can submit our draft to Caltrans. And I will note that this went in front of the TAC at their February meeting, and they provided a recommendation that the board approve as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, is there any public comments on this? I see none. I hear none. I will say it's good to have a balanced budget and to be light on the LTF claims, and so that's good. With that, we'll close public comment and entertain a motion.
I'll move that that the board approve the draft fiscal 2026-2027 OWP and the budget, and direct the staff to forward to Caltrans for its review and comments.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? None. Thank you. So with that, we move to our next item, the SB 125 Formula Transit Funding Revised Regional Allocation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. So this one's kind of an exciting one, and I'll provide a little bit of backstory as well, that'll kind of lead into the business item piece, which is the funding through SB 125 itself. So for those who may not be familiar, SB 125 is a supplementary one-time augmentation that the state legislature did for the STA funding. This ultimately provided about $16.5 million in supplementary funding to Humboldt County, and it provided supplementary funding to transportation agencies all over the state, to be clear. But HCOG's apportionment was about $16.5 million. Back in 2024, HCOG submitted what is now an approved spending plan for those funds, which would almost entirely go to the Humboldt Transit Authority to act as operational support and capital project support for a lot of the work they have going there. I will note that SB 125 funds, similar to STA funds, are only eligible to be used by transit operators that are open to the general public, of which HTA is for all intents and purposes the only one. Right now, they're the only one. So that's why the entirety of that funding amount went to HTA. So fast forward to now. In the last 6 months or so, HCOG staff, in addition to City of Fortuna staff and staff with the Humboldt Transit Authority, have been collaboratively meeting and discussing some potential revisions to the transit system here in Humboldt, principally the RTS system through Humboldt Transit Authority and Fortuna Transit, of course, down in Fortuna. So a recommendation from HCOG's last transit development plan in 2023 for the long-term viability and performance of the system was to perform some streamlining type operations for Redwood Transit System, which would allow their buses to reach destinations more quickly and service bus stops more frequently. And also for Fortuna Transit to consider opening to microtransit to the general public, which would provide more coverage for more citizens. And it would also supplement some of the changes that would be needed on the Redwood Transit System line in order to make those modifications to their service. So we've been discussing that kind of as a regional working group across agencies, if you will. And this culminated so far in February of 2026. As Chair Johnson will know, this item came in front of the Fortuna City Council to consider opening their 5310 service to a general public service. And their council provided concurrence to staff to go ahead and pursue that. So one of the discussions that we've been going back and forth with between HCOG and HTA and City of Fortuna is for the city to ultimately launch into a general public available service. There are some capital investments that would be required in order for them to achieve that, which includes the procurement of a few vehicles in addition to procuring and launching what's called the RideCo app. So this is the scheduling and route planning app that HTA uses that really helps as you start to take on more transit operations. It helps plan your service routes, plan all these things, which will be important for Fortuna, who is small staffed and will be taking on a higher rider count opening to microtransit. So as part of our discussions, we did identify the possibility to reallocate some SB 125 funds that were previously earmarked for Humboldt Transit Authority. Those could be switched over to the City of Fortuna to make those one-time capital purchases, which would allow them to open to the general population. And once they achieve that status, they'd have other funding sources available to them to help supplement their operating costs. So with that, what is being proposed in this particular staff item is we're asking the board to authorize a revision to the SB 125 spending plan to provide up to $300,000 of the previously allocated HTA funding to the City of Fortuna to make these purchases. I note in the staff report, we do put $300,000 in there. I believe their expected expenditures right now, and when I say they, I mean Fortuna, is approximately $250 to $270, but the numbers aren't finalized at the time of the staff report, so we wanted to put enough in there to where we we had concurrence on a total amount. But at the end of the day, we'll work towards defining the amount that is required in order for them to make the purchases that they need to make. So with that, just a couple of additional things I will note. Like I said, HTA and both their general manager and their deputy general manager have been part of all these conversations, and they're very much on board on the staff level with moving forward with this proposal and reallocating some of the funding that would previously have come to their agency for Fortuna Transit. They recognize the importance of Fortuna's micro transit system to help achieve their long-term goals with RTS as well. I will also note that we as HCOG staff have done some preliminary outreach with CalSTA, who manages the SB 125 funding, and they've indicated that the process we're proposing is good, and that the change in funding from HTA to Fortuna Transit is an eligible use of funds and absolutely in line with the intent of the legislative directive for the fund. So we are looking for concurrence from the board for staff to move forward and make that revision and finalize the work with CalSTA as needed. And we're anticipating that may take about upwards of a month to achieve. And staff will also continue working with City Fortuna and with HTA as both of them are, continuing to work on their ends to change service. So with that, I will hand it back to the board. I would like to note we do have Amy Nelson here, who is also able to speak. She is the city manager with Fortuna, wearing her transit hat tonight as well. So thank you.
Thank you for the staff report. And is there any questions or comments from the PAC? See none. Well, is there any public comment?
Hi, I'm Amy Nilsson, the city manager in Fortuna, and I did want to just reaffirm that we've had some wonderful conversations with HCOG staff and HTA staff about Fortuna's paratransit system opening up to the general public. And so with the city council's approval, we will open up to the general public, assuming we can get these funds necessary to make those capital investments in buses. Currently, the fleet in the city of Fortuna is 2015, 2011, 2017 buses that we cannot find replacement parts for. So we're really looking forward to upgrading those and opening up to the general public and just broadening our scope of service. So thank you for your consideration. We really appreciate it very much. And I'd also be happy to answer any questions should your board have any.
Thank you. I would also point towards the streamlining that HTA wants to make will pretty much eliminate, I can't remember if it was 7 stops, 14 to 20 riders that were going to be missed. And by opening up, we will pick up those people and be able to transport them to an active bus stop so that they can continue to make their connections. And it'll allow RTS, HTA to streamline their service and be a more responsive and timely service for the public at the same time. And we have had people approach us regarding more ridership for the Fortuna transit system, and this allows for that. So it's a win-win-win. So there are no more comments, questions, no public comment. So with that, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the revised SB 125 transit funding allocation up to $300,000 and direct staff to submit to CalSTA. Anything else? All right.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. So all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? None. So thank you. And that brings us now to item C, adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan and certification of addendum to the final environmental impact report.
Excellent. I'll take this one again. So, as our final item of business tonight is the update to the RTP and the certification of the addendum to the CEQA document as noted. I will be somewhat brief in the delivery of the item just because we've discussed it a number of times, but I'd like to leave as much time for discussion, and I know there's a few items still that we'd like to get some board input on even now as we finalize the document. And hopefully once finalized, we can send on to Caltrans immediately, because this is our deadline month in order to get our RTP updated and sent in. As a quick matter of order before we dive in, I will just note too, we are asking for 2 motions as part of this particular item. The first being the motion that would certify addendum number 3 to the 2013 environmental impact report for the RTP, and a second separate motion that is the recommended approval of the regional transportation plan 2026 to 2046. So in summary, as the board may recall, in November we brought an administrative draft of the RTP for all of our committees and for the board to approve, putting that out for public comment. The public comment period closed just after Christmas. Staff have been working on responding to comments and finalizing the draft document. Of course, on January 15th, we had kind of a working discussion item to go through some of those comments and get board direction. And what you have in front of you now is the final full document with full appendices that has been also reviewed by the SS TAC and the TAC, who have provided concurrence and are passing forward a recommendation that the board approve the documents. So starting with the environmental impact report addendum number 3. So as mentioned in the staff report, in 2013, an environmental impact report was completed for the RTP at that time. That is the document that gives it coverage under the California Environmental Quality Act. In subsequent years, HCOG has elected to complete addendums to the CEQA document. Addendums are appropriate when there's little or no substantive changes, or there's no changes within the scope of the project that create any new impacts. As a planning document that largely, adds more progressive and forward-thinking policies in there, of course, the circumstance of needing to update the environmental document has never happened, and it has not happened this time around. So staff and our consultants who completed the addendum are recommending to move forward with certifying the addendum. And to pull it directly from the staff report, this from a consultant, the updates and revisions to the policies and programs in the 2026 RTP do not impose any new significant environmental impacts or increase the severity of the identified impacts. So an addendum, a third addendum, is considered appropriate. And through the motion that's recommended at the front of the staff report, staff is recommending that the board adopt Resolution 2026, which is certifying EIR addendum number 3. So that's the environmental portion of it. Now moving over to the RTP itself. So as the board recalls, the few items we were working on our January 15th meeting and seeking direction on were the 3 items that were the principal portion of our public comment. Of course, that was the climate change, climate crisis subject, which we have since changed. We felt like there was some pretty robust and uniform board discussion on that item in January 15th. So we've gone ahead and made those revisions back to how they previously were in the previous RTP. Also for the second one, which was the walkable, bikeable, transit-related housing goal being proposed in 2030 as opposed to 2022, we felt there was pretty robust discussion and concurrence from the board at that time. So we went ahead and made that change back to the previous timeline. The third item, the funding consistency analysis, after review of the item after the board meeting, we felt that there wasn't quite enough discussion or direction from the board for staff to make a clear decision there. So we are looking for board direction as part of any motion finalizing tonight, what you would like to see in the final document, and if you would like to see that policy re-included or reinstated as part of the final document that we will submit to Caltrans. So just highlighting that one. And then lastly, I will note we did receive the formal request from the county per Board Member Madrone's comments on adding an additional project to the project list, which is the US 101 interchange project at Hiller Road in McKinleyville. So those are the major portions of the final RTP I wanted to highlight as it pertains to the things that we have talked about before. One additional item that is noted in the staff report, which we had not discussed previously, are the major transit stops. So as the board may recall, before approving the release of the public review document at our November meeting, one of the discussion comments that had come forward during public comment was the desire to explore designating more stops within Humboldt's transit system as major transit stops. Major transit stops in California code have some significance in their definition. If a regional transportation planning agency through their RTP designates major transit stops in the RTP, it provides for some land use implications, principally of which a major transit stop designated in the RTP within a half a mile of that major transit stop, a local agency parking minimum enforcement does not apply. So there is no minimum parking enforcement if those stops are designated in the RTP. And then there is also some streamlining for VMT analysis. So if a project otherwise would have been subject to VMT analysis under CEQA for a development project, that project could be argued as exempt if it's within a half mile of a major transit stop. So unlike a lot of kind of the policy and the guidance we have in the RTP, this is certainly one that actually has some real world implications in land use across not only Humboldt County, but throughout the state of California. So with that direction, in January, we started looking at expanding the definition of major transit stops in the RTP. So a little background here. When this legislative action was taken to make the major transit stops in 2024, the HCOG board voted to approve 7 existing Humboldt Transit Authority stops within the region as major transit stops. And the thinking at that time was there was a pretty clear cutoff between the 7 stops that had quite a bit of on-offs and then the stops below it, which really kind of, there was a pretty defined drop in the number of riders that were accessing those stops. So those were added via an amendment in January of 2024. What is being proposed and shown in the staff report is expanding the definition of major transit stops all the way to bus stops that are receiving at least 50 passengers per day. So staff put that together. We did put it in the packets for the SS TAC and the TAC, but as noted in the staff report, we did decide to recommend pulling it from the final RTP. Reason being is, admittedly, staff, we were a little bit behind in developing the concept and getting it in front of local agencies. So we really feel that to move forward and finalize this piece of it, we'd like to do our due diligence a little bit more, given that there's real land use implications with this designation and that it was not included in the public review draft. What staff is envisioning at this point is taking this list and writing a narrative of the methodology and doing a little bit more due diligence on that end, and then providing a formal notice transmittal to local agencies with a comment period and then a hearing date for which HCOG would consider adding these via amendment. So that is the staff recommended direction at this time, just again, given that our local agency outreach on this hasn't been quite as robust on this particular item as we otherwise would like. So that's the recommended direction there. I'm happy to take any supplementary or follow-up questions from the board on that. But I think we could bring this back, with a 30-day local agency comment period to a board decision at our April board meeting. So pretty quickly. One final note on that is I did have some discussions with a handful of folks, local agency folks in the community development departments who were on board with this approach. Some of them, while everybody is generally on board with the concept, not all of them had time to look into it in detail and provide written thoughts or comments back to HCOG on what we had put forward there. So with that, I will just end by saying at the end of this, we are looking for, again, a final motion and adoption of Resolution 2026-04, which should be the adoption of the RTP. And again, I'll highlight, we're looking for some discussion and direction as it pertains to that funding consistency analysis policy, in addition to the major transit stops. So I'll hand it back to the board.
All right, thank you. A lot of meat there. And is there any PAC comments, questions? Yes.
I'm wondering, in the first paragraph of the staff report, it says that most developments are exempt from the parking requirements and the VMT impact fees. Do you know, offhand, can you describe any projects that are exempt from that?
Yeah, and I can't speak with full authority here, but as an example, a lot of like the housing projects that are happening throughout the city of Eureka, you'll see them being constructed. There are what are called infill exemptions in CEQA. So a lot of housing related projects are the other types that you see more frequently in Humboldt. Those are often, their environmental clearance is through a CEQA categorical exemption. And so if you're getting a categorical exemption, you're not analyzing impacts through CEQA, which VMT is one of them. So I guess what I mean to say by that in the context of the staff report is a lot of our projects here are already exempt from doing VMT analysis just by their nature as infill. But that's not all of them. There are some commercial projects or ones that happen kind of outside of the immediate built environment that have the requirement to do a CEQA review. And those projects, if they happen to be within a half a mile of a designated major transit stop, could make the case that they're exempt from that CEQA impact, given the proximity.
Okay. Is there any indication that the 7 stops that were identified in 2023 have experienced more applications for housing nearby, or is there any, you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I'm not familiar if that's been the case or not. I can say that Development Services Director Kenyon with the City of Eureka was one of the commenting members when this came up at our November meeting, who had indicated that it was a good and positive thing for the City of Eureka. So I'm imagining there's been some benefits that they've seen from the designations.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mayor Burgell.
So I'm curious, in looking at the RTP, are there negative implications of adopting it now and then adding later? I mean, what would that look like? Secondly, could this be part and parcel? Could certain, maybe Eureka, Arcata, could we adopt our portion if Arcata, but, could Eureka and potentially some other cities adopt today and then add at a later date these other cities? What would that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways to move forward, and I think, to be clear, it's this board's responsibility to consider and add these. So if there were ones that the board was comfortable voting on as part of a motion this evening, we could do that, and that list could be finalized as part of the RTP, which would be sent into Caltrans. If there's ones that weren't included, we would still want to work on that because we want to put forward a uniform methodology and a uniform approach, and we could still do that outreach. Those would have to be, assuming everybody's on board and wants to go forward, we would have to bring that back as an amendment, and any change to the RTP as a resolution. So we would have to bring that back, but it could be in relatively short order, and it's not a tremendous amount of staff time in doing those things. So, and again, I think, from staff's perspective, we just want to make sure that, we're following the process and providing notification and making sure that we're getting, all the input before making these decisions. So, but yes, there's a number of ways to move forward. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a reason why it didn't go out earlier?
The direction came in as part of when we released the public review draft. So, and to use the term, that I guess the ship had already sailed insofar as getting it into the public and to our local agencies at that time, because we started working on the concept of adding more after the public review draft was already out. So it was in, early January when we started to work on this concept. But then you just kind of run into a tight timeline where, some local agency staff are out and, the notification window just wasn't quite as robust. And we didn't get full feedback from all of our member agencies within that time period. So that's where, we considered the alternative of just adding a little bit more time, making it a formal transmittal, referencing a specific hearing date for which that would be considered. So.
And were there cities you feel like you got full response from?
Conversational response, I'll say. Yeah. And I would also say I believe it's while we talk about and do a lot of these things on the staff level, recognize we all answer to our boards and our councils and everything like that. And the thing I cannot speak to is, whatever process any staff has had with, their other executive level management staff or their councils and everything like that. So that's why I guess somewhat recommend going through a process like that. But by all means, that we could move forward in any number of ways, including adopting them all this evening if that was the board's direction they'd like to go. So.
And if we did adopt them and found through information later down the line that things needed to be changed, could it be addended? Could it be changed the other direction? Instead could things be removed?
I would imagine it could. I think it's certainly would be more more streamlined to do the front end work and take that. But yeah, you could do any number of things through resolution. And I will note, this is a change to the California code that defines a major transit stop. The original definition is put in code as it pertains to the intent of the land use implications, was a definition of a transit stop that doesn't exist anywhere in Humboldt. It was intersecting bus lines with 15-minute service intervals, I believe. They expanded it through legislative action to add a third category, which was or as designated in the applicable RTP. So it does provide some room for interpretation. And one of the steps that we're trying to take is just making sure that we feel pretty solid about our interpretation and that that's clearly communicated in the RTP too. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Sure. First, I'd like to start by acknowledging the work that the HCOG staff has done, the committees, technical advisory groups that have contributed to this RFP, elemental P, sorry, QRS, too many acronyms, the RTP. These major stops have been reviewed and recommended for approval by the Technical Advisory Committee and the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee. Turn on your mic, please. Oh, am I not on? Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry. Wanted to acknowledge the HCOG staff. So thank you for all of your work and all of the advisory groups that have contributed. And I just want to say that these have been reviewed and recommended for approval. And they have been part of the public draft for months without any objection to date. To my understanding, there has been no jurisdiction that has formally objected. Can you clarify that for me?
Well, a few clarifications. It was not part of the formal public review draft. It has been part of, what's in this particular packet. And we have not received any objections from any local agencies, but we have also not necessarily received any written positive concurrence either.
So thank you. I guess I want to concur with Mayor Burgell in that I feel like we should adopt it today. We can add an addendum. I do, recognize the importance of a consistent process and jurisdictional, I can't talk today, engagement. And that's why Arcata does support in principle, provided that we have a near-term deadline so that we know that this is going to come to fruition, and not be opting in or opting out, or, you know, I want to see that. I would like to get it done tonight if possible.
Yes. Supervisor Arroyo.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody. Unfortunately, the audit committee, which oversees Measure O funding, was scheduled right before this meeting. So I'm sorry to be late today. I asked that next time that not happen so that folks who want to be there can be there. However, on this item, I just had a couple of points of feedback. I concur with where the direction is going thus far. And I had a couple of other thoughts about the major transit stops. I did reach out to John Ford, our planning and building director, and so to back up, the TAC is largely public works personnel and transit, and there were no issues raised there with the major transit stops. Apparently, I don't go to that meeting, but that's what I heard as a report out from a couple folks. I did speak with our planning and building director at the county about the implications of the stops in the county. And I do just want to note that Willow Creek is a little bit of an unusual situation where the bulk of the ridership is driven by high school, not all of it, but a significant portion of it, high school students riding from Willow Creek into Arcata to go to school. That's a little bit different circumstantially than the other stops that are in the county. And so the McKinleyville sites, Director Ford really felt that was appropriate to designate them as major transit stops. I also had a chance to talk with a couple other folks, Eureka City Manager being one of them, just to hear the thoughts and talk about some other transit related matters, and sounded like that was broadly supported, but of course I don't speak for Eureka. From a HTA perspective, it would be helpful to know which the major designated transit stops are as we go through our streamlining process for the Redwood Transit line, which we're working on, and the board has given direction to move forward with that in preparation for the new fiscal year, to make it, and I'll say more about that in my report at the end of the meeting, but we're working on making sure that the route works for the greatest number of people, by making sure that the stops that are on the line are the ones that are most used. And so having this align with that process would be helpful. So that was board direction given at our last meeting. I'm not sure, unfortunately, because of that conflict today, what happened with the previous item. But I think the staff recommendation was to provisionally approve it and then reach out to HTA. If that's how it went, this could be a similar process of approving it today, with the caveat that HCOG staff work with the jurisdictions to ensure that they don't have any concerns. I want to note that the Willow Creek site was seen as like a little bit of a square peg round hole situation. Otherwise, I didn't hear any concerns from those I talked to about the ones on this list. Oh, and I also want to voice support for the public comments around funding consistency. Many transportation projects and collaborating agencies really are required to look to the regional transportation plan for guidance and show alignment with it. So I think it only makes sense for our funding decisions, including allocations to, participating member agencies, be consistent with the regional transportation plan also.
Okay, well, I was just gonna, I'm not done, I just wanted to point out that I personally am not comfortable just taking back to the other 4 members of our city council and the people that are not here today to tell them that we've designated that particular stop in Fortuna at 11th and N as a major stop with the potential development ramifications and such as that. Other than that, I'm not against the whole principle of it. I understand they're already stopping there, the transit system is, but to change it in such a way that things that you brought up and the changes that could be made, something that I personally, and I don't know about the rest of the council members, would not want to just adopt something without conferring with my other council members and development staff, public works, such as that. So that's the one thing that I would say. And Supervisor Wilson.
All right, thanks. Let's see, just a couple things, and I also want to make sure that we hear from public as well, because I think I would like to hear what their thoughts on this if they're in the space. But two things. One is wow, some a couple things. One is on the major transit stop discussion. I mean, I guess ask the ED this is that there were major transit stops delineated in the previous version of this report or plan, and why it seems like it would be the conservative approach would just be to keep those in until we make changes as opposed to removing them. And that's my first sort of thought. And then the second one is on the consistency and accountability element that was removed and that there's some discussion about. And I would say I align myself with what I think Supervisor Arroyo was saying about having that something like that remain in the document. I did see the previous version of this where it was named not as a policy but as a program or a project, which was in the sort of the preparation of the history of funded projects with HCOG and the RTP priorities and that narrative around that. So those are my two comments, and so I'm happy to have more discussion.
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Kenny.
Thank you. Yeah, my perspective is that when I first read this, before I flipped over to the second page and saw that staff was recommending that we postpone adding the additional stops on there, it raised some concerns for me because, the word major ordinarily denotes a very significant portion of something. And then when I saw to change it to, if it has 1% of the stops, that would be considered major. I said, wait a second, that doesn't really add up for me. And I think it was appropriate that he used the word defensible. It would be more defensible if there was a more crunching of the numbers, so to speak, and because we want to make sure that we don't decouple our process from, basic logic and reason, even though for a good cause, it's always tempting to do that. But I think in the long run, you're better off if you, make sure that that it stands to reason, basically, what you're talking about doing. So the other problem is I may not be understanding the math totally in the chart because, there's several columns, and like the first column, referring to the HSU library, it's got a 10.74%, and that's also the cumulative percent. And then the next one down has 6.54%, but cumulative 17.26. So I might need a little more explanation of what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second column from the right that just shows percent, that's the percentage of total on-offs that stop sees. So as you see at the library circle, that's about 11% almost of total on-offs on the system. The cumulative column on the right is the sum total of that stop and all stops before it. So what we're really showing here, if you can imagine, is that all stops listed in this table, if you look at the bottom right, all stops in total represent 57.46% of the total on-offs for the transit system. So as you go down each column, it adds in that new
I see.
differential percent. So we're talking about stops that represent almost 60% of the ridership of the system there.
Okay. Well, that's somewhat helpful, but I'm in support of the go slow method and make sure we have a defensible process in our conclusions.
I like that sentence. Allow more time for review at the local agency level. Because I think we all are part of our board. So.
Chair Johnson, I just want to, I don't know if this was part of the staff report. If so, I missed it. But I mean, we have the authority to declare major transit stops. The common definition in more urban areas doesn't really apply to us. We're not. I think it's unlikely that we'll ever have service every 15 minutes here. Maybe we'll get there. We're working on streamlining, improving our trunk line to possibly have service every 30 minutes to all our stops, which would be an enormous accomplishment. And we're really working on that for the next fiscal year. But this, the idea that, CEQA exempt projects would be within a half a mile of a major transit stop has pretty significant implications for coming anywhere close to meeting any of our arena numbers. I know, this board has, and many of your boards may have been a little flummoxed by the arena numbers, but nonetheless, we got to get somewhere close to those to be on track with the state. So, this is a potential tool, but it also helps to convey to HTA, your local transit authority, which are these major stops so that this planning process is all in alignment. So we're working on frequency and we're working on all of the other things that go with transit-oriented development. From my perspective, if any jurisdiction is like, absolutely not, we don't want our stop in there, then it's up to this board to determine whether to remove that. But, that common definition of major transit stops with a frequency interval of 15 minutes or less, or an intersection of two or more major bus routes is augmented by, or as identified in a regional transportation plan by the local transportation planning agency, which is us. So we do have that. I don't think we need to get hung up on the definition that is in the bill that we're talking about with CEQA, because there's that or in there, and that's where we have a lot of authority to recognize that our area doesn't look like many of the other areas where this legislation was developed and thought of when it was envisioned. So that's why that or exists.
Okay. How about a public comment?
Good evening, board and staff. My name is Josefina Barantes, and I'm here representing CRTP, the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, and EPIC, the Environmental Protection Information Center. I want to address two issues. First, for the RTP to have its intended effect, it is imperative that funding decisions by HCOG should be consistent with the RTP. A funding consistency policy says that HCOG should prioritize funding projects that do the most to advance the RTP's goals of safety, climate action, and equity. The lack of such a policy fundamentally undermines the purpose of the RTP and supports the unfortunate idea that the plan is just another pile of paper. Supervisor Madrone had previously spoken up in favor of such a consistency policy, but he is unfortunately out of the county today. I asked the board to give explicit direction to staff to return with a consistency policy. Second, I asked that the addition of major transit stops be returned to the RTP. The request to add new major transit stops came at the request of the City of Eureka and Humboldt Transit Authority, and the additional major transit stops proposed is likewise supported by the Humboldt County Planning Department. As Eureka has experienced designation of major transit stops has helped the city get housing built in the city by relaxing minimum parking standards around these stops. I ask that the 14 major transit stops that staff have pulled from this iteration of the RTP be restored. Or at a minimum, please restore all the designation of all major transit stops that are supported by the jurisdiction in which they are located. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Simmons. I am the climate attorney at the Environmental Protection Information Center, better known as EPIC. I believe in Executive Director Byrd's report, when he was separating out major transit stops from other sections of the RTP, he said that one of the things that made them different was that they had sort of real world implications. And my hope is that the entire RTP will have real world implications. And I think one of the ways to ensure that is to reintroduce the funding consistency analysis that was in the previous version of the RTP, although unfortunately was never realized. I think the entire purpose of HCOG is to have regional planning goals around transportation, and that checking to see if the discretionary projects that you all are funding are meeting the goals that staff have worked very hard on in this plan makes a ton of sense. It doesn't mean that every single project has to be a bike lane or a bus stop, but checking to see if projects are furthering the safety and climate and emissions goals that are in this plan makes a ton of sense. I also support the major transit stops. I'll say, as someone who lives within half a mile of a major transit stop, it has not terrifyingly changed land use, and that it's okay to plan aspirationally for future major transit stops. I really appreciate what Supervisor Arroyo said about how, the definition from the previous language really was never meant to apply to us here. What you all are doing as an RTP is saying this is where we want more people to live so that they can use public transit. Thank you.
Chair Johnson, if I may, I want to make one clarification because I just want to make sure that there's not some confusion, even if it's just confusion in my own head. When we talk about pulling major transit stops, we're not talking about pulling previously established major transit stops. Those ones that were added via resolution, they would absolutely stay in there. What we're talking about is what the process is for the expansion of the list beyond the 7 that were already in there. So I just want to make sure that point is clear if it wasn't clearly enough presented in the staff report.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Lohefner. I'm a senior planner here at the City of Eureka. Director Kenyon was unable to be here tonight, so asked me to speak. We'd like to encourage the board to retain the additional major transit stops in the RTP rather than delaying designation. Expanding the list is consistent with the direction the RTP already sets, aligning transportation and land use, supporting infill development, reducing VMT, advancing greenhouse gas reduction goals, and supporting mode shift. Local jurisdictions are already making land use decisions around transit proximity, updating housing elements, advancing climate action plans, revising parking standards, and these major transit stop designations play an important role in that, affecting SEQR review, parking requirements, and encouraging infill housing and mixed-use development. We've seen firsthand in Eureka how this designation helps get housing built, and expanding the transit stop network would continue to support those regional and local efforts. HCOG has also just kicked off the PACT project, which is focused on better connecting land use and transit planning across the region, coordinating growth with transit service, and recognizing additional major transit stops is a tangible way to put that effort into practice. Ultimately, establishing new major transit stops now provides clarity for local implementation, supports our region's climate and housing goals, and reinforces the land use transit coordination that HCOG is already leading. So with that, thank you, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Oh, yes.
Executive Director Byrd, just to confirm, this will be coming before us in 2 months from now. Is that correct? Or what was the delay time again?
before this would be coming back before us?
Yeah, staff's proposal was basically just to do a formal notice period so that local agencies could discuss it amongst themselves and provide written comment back, however that looks. I would imagine we would initiate that immediately, tomorrow, first thing next week, and that we would come back to the board with the same list or a modified list or an expanded definition or however that might look through kind of a more robust collaborative process in April is what the thought would be there.
Is there any key reason to rush it through? I'm not picking up on why it's so urgent.
I think a decent amount has been said. The board has certain absolute discretion, right, to define as per code and as per PAC member Roy had mentioned. I think it's most everybody, in concept is on board with this whole thing, and I don't want in any way, shape, or form for the perception to be as part of this item that we're looking to pull it back for any reasons along that. I think it's more just about making sure that we're going through kind of the standard due diligence steps that would generally be associated with, things that have land use implications as a plan that kind of spreads throughout a region. So I don't think there's any negative impacts per se, other than a loss of opportunity to really kind of 100% vet it and make sure that it was all kind of in one fell swoop and that definition was solid. There's some other things. We talked at the staff level. I talked with Planning Director Ford, and he had kicked around the idea of thinking about major transit stops and how that would coalesce with the Regional Climate Action Plan and some of the designations under some of the policy items in there, which would actually be a further expansion of this list. So it's really just wanting to make sure that we do it in a robust way where everyone kind of has the opportunity to discuss it. That's the thinking anyway, but we could bring it back quickly. It could be brought forward tonight if there was a consensus on what that would look like. I think anyway is just about the same as far as staff's perspective is.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, Skip.
Two comments. One is I would not have a problem with a delay as recommended by staff. And on funding analysis, my concern is that it has the potential for limiting discretionary funding in smaller jurisdictions. We had projects a few months ago. One was the Francis Street project in Ferndale, and I felt it met 4 of the eligible project types: a mode shift, safety, accessibility to a major park, and it was a pavement also. So, I don't know if there would be other comment about the potential for funding analysis having an impact on smaller jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did
Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I think in response to the question about what's the rush, I think, having this information of the list of stops where 50 or more passengers embark and disembark per day is helpful already. But as I mentioned, the HTA board has given direction to look at streamlining our trunk route in the new fiscal year, which starts July 1. So already that's operationally a lot of planning around changes to schedules and posting schedules, driver schedules. We'll have 8 to 9 buses running at once to make those 30-minute headways where all stops would be served every 30 minutes. So it's pretty cool for riders. It really aligned with the transit development plan and other transit planning documents that this board has seen over the years and that HTA is executing. But it would involve inherently eliminating some stops. So we want to make sure that there's syncing up between whatever HCOG decides about major transit stop designations and our operational planning. So and it's going to be a big shift that I don't think we want to do a bunch of times so that people can get used to, because folks who take the bus every day really, really rely on knowing the schedule and, getting into those patterns, especially with fixed route transit. It's really important for that sense of understanding and reliability of the system to be there. So that's one reason why it might be helpful to do it quicker than 6 months, so that this process aimed at July 1, 2026, and HTA could delay that, but that was our board's direction at our last meeting, will be in sync with it.
I think Executive Director Byrd can clarify, but I think we're looking at trying to get it done by April, not 6 months, it'd be August, no. We want to get it done by April when the RTP is adopted, right?
The RTP, the adoption would be now, and we would get that done now. I believe that staff could fully bring back, should the board, be inclined to go with a slightly slower approach to deliver the same type of thing. I believe confidently we could bring it back in April.
Yeah, that's what I was just getting at. We're not looking at 6 months, just take it back to our jurisdiction so that everybody knows what's happening, instead of, oh, by the way, we gave up control of some certain parts of development in a half-mile circle around this intersection.
The reason I said 6 months is because that's what's in the staff report. So,
Well, but anyways, yes, Mayor Burgell.
So I support adding the transit portion into the RTP today. I believe I did not hear you say that anybody you've talked to has had any negativity, except for what we've heard tonight, but any negativity about the process or what's going to happen or any of the stops or any of that. Were you clear about that? There's been no negative response at this time?
I have had no negative response. I have not, and I don't believe we as an agency have talked necessarily to all the folks that necessarily would need to. And at least, again, from staff's perspective and what I want to put forward to the board, and again, this is a decision point by this board, land use implication stuff, typically is not a staff level decision. It's a board level decision.
Sure.
So.
And so what I would say is, it sounds like that we haven't really heard much in negativity. We're holding up HTA. 2 months to work on that plan. And I think that if cities feel confident that they want to opt out for now and go through the process, great. I think the city of Eureka, we've had conversations. I think we're on board with moving forward. I think that we should move forward. I don't think the delay is necessary for us. So regardless of Fortuna or other cities that may not want to be a part of, I would like to add us today. And I believe I heard Mayor White on that same page with me. I could be wrong. She may have changed her mind.
No, I concur.
And I feel that, you know, if there are negative implications, we can always go back and adjust for those. But this gives the opportunity for HTA to move forward. This gives the opportunity for us to move forward as a city. So I support adding them.
I would just say also that it's not that I'm against it. I would say that I'm probably the only one on the Fortuna City Council that knows about this list and understands what it is and what it could do. But so I would like to have fellow council members weigh in on it, or at least be aware of it before we. So, you know, it's already a major transit stop in the city of Fortuna. Maybe not ridership wise compared to Eureka or Arcata, but I know for a fact it's the busiest stop in Fortuna. I don't think it's going to change. But as a matter of looking to the whole council, that's my hesitation, not my thoughts on whether it's worthy or not.
Sure. And that's fair enough. And so what I would say that I think we should adopt it with cities that want to opt in this evening, and cities that are not prepared to do so, then you can do your delay, and as the due diligence comes forward, we can make an amendment.
I was going to say go.
Yeah,
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny.
Are we allowed to do that even? I mean, isn't this, the regional transportation implicates HCOG as a body? The cities, do they?
I don't see there's any conflict or reason that couldn't be done. I think that this board and the RTPA, that is HCOG, has the responsibility and the latitude to designate those stops. And there is certainly a lot of latitude within the update to the code that was provided that, you know, says as designated by the RTP. So there's no reason that couldn't happen, and we absolutely could make the revisions as directed by the board, whether that's, you know, the jurisdictions that are on board and want to do it now. You know, we could present that list. It can be part of, you know, the final document that is approved via this resolution. And if there's ones that we want to think a little bit more on, which frankly, no matter how this item goes forward, we'll continue to look at that and continue to think about the definition and what makes sense. You know, we could bring other things back via amendment. And if that includes making sure that we do outreach with Fortuna and get a response from them, if that includes working with, I believe I may have heard from PAC member Arroyo that the site in Willow Creek may be something that, you know, maybe not. I guess I want to make sure I'm interpreting your, you know, your direction on the square peg round hole for that particular piece. But I just would like to make sure that, you know, we have a clear understanding of what that is. And there's no reason that, you know, we couldn't adopt a final plan this evening and still amend and make sure we do our due diligence as needed. So.
Can I elaborate on that? My discussion with Director Ford, and I do want to recognize that Supervisor Wilson is here as the HCOG member for the county, but because it had been a little bit of an unusual week, and, you know, Supervisor Madrone was out, and anyway, I took the opportunity to speak to Director Ford just so I'd be a little more informed for this conversation. And you know, I think I was springing it on him, so he didn't have a lot of time to process it, but once we talked about the sites in McKinleyville, I was like, those make great sense. That's, you know, a benefit to us. Makes good sense from a planning perspective and land use perspective. I think he needed to think a little bit more about Willow Creek, but was recognizing that the driver for a lot of the transit use is students using that as a method of transportation to school, which is important. And, you know, high school students or middle school students or whoever's taking the bus to school all the way from Willow Creek, we know that it's certainly high school students, but it may be others as well, are important to consider, but they're not necessarily an indicator of the transit need for development there. They might be, but they might not be. And that Willow Creek is just a much smaller community, has different characteristics. And so there might be some additional analysis needed there. So I would want to verify that with him, but he seemed very pro moving forward with the McKinleyville transit stops.
If I could just once more briefly, to Supervisor Arroyo's comments about the legislature inserting the word "or" and giving us the discretion, I believe we still have to make a finding that these are major, transportation stops. They didn't say "or other stops which are not major but for other reasons should be considered the same as a major stop." So what we're not allowed to do is make arbitrary decisions. And that's what it felt like to me when I first, read about the reinterpretation of the word major that would essentially triple the number of stops that qualified. So, that gave me pause, and I would be much more comfortable giving staff more of an opportunity to, strengthen, if that's going to be the final recommendation, that it needs to be strengthened in some way so that we can, with good conscience say, yes, these are major stops in the system. So for that reason, I would move that we decline to add beyond what have already been identified as the 7 major stops to the system at this meeting, and allow staff to confer with the cities and the other staff and essentially find a way to give us some cover that these qualify as major stops. And maybe it'll be a smaller list next time, maybe it won't. But that's my motion.
Second.
One second.
So would you be willing to add an amendment that the cities of Eureka and Arcata, the major transit stops, would be included in this process, or is that completely off the table?
You mean the ones that are included as
The city of Eureka.
that would be added?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the ones that are not going to be added are already part of, correct?
Well, yeah, there's the ones that exist and the ones that are proposed. Well,
Supervisor Wilson. has a
Yeah.
question.
Supervisor Wilson.
Yeah, I have a question of process. Does this body use amending motions? Is that something that happens in this for HCOG? Meaning, can there be an amended motion, a motion to amend the primary motion? Do you guys do that?
Amend the staff recommended motion? Is that what you're looking at?
No. A lot of bodies, including the board of supervisors we have, where you can have a motion that's your base motion, and then you have amendments that you can vote on. And if the vote passes for that amendment, it gets added to the motion. That way the motion maker and the seconder don't have absolute control over whether or not something's added or not. The body adds the amendments. It's just a way to kind of get through this kind of process. Otherwise, you might be seeing kind of back and forths. This is a question for the attorney as to whether or not that's something that this body does or has part of its process.
I personally haven't seen it done that way, but perhaps Brendan would weigh in on.
Yeah, we at least in my time here, we haven't experienced that, but I think it is absolutely normal to break things down into pieces as they lead into there, and that I believe we may have done that. Now that I think back on it with some recent items, so I think something the board could do is break a few more motions down as it pertains to these other items that staff are seeking direction on, which is the major transit stops and the funding consistency analysis, and then that can you know, those are decisions that effectively precede a final draft RTP. After that, the motions for the environmental compliance and the final document resolution itself could be made after those decisions are made by the board.
Well, to
Through
Mayor
the chair,
Bell's-
if I could just offer that there is a motion and a second, I believe, on the floor for the staff recommendation. If I'm understanding Mayor Burgell, is that she's seeking, if we're doing this process, she would be seeking a motion and a second to allow for the cities of Eureka and Arcata to add their transit stops to that, to the motion. Is that what I'm hearing from?
I'm not seeking a new motion. I'm seeking to add that to the motion. And that's how I would have made the motion if I had gotten my hand called first. So
Well, right. But what I'm getting at is that you can make an amending motion that we can vote on, and if that amending motion is passes, then that basically adds it to the motion.
So as a point of clarification, though, if we vote on this motion
Mm-hmm.
and that is not included, and we vote yes,
Mm-hmm.
and then my part of the emotion gets no, then I didn't want to vote yes. So that makes no sense to
And
me.
you don't have to. You don't have to. So what it does, it goes backwards. So basically, you vote on the amendment. And
Oh,
if the amendment passes, it's attached, and then you can vote on what is there with the amendment or not. But this just allows you to see if the board's willing to add that amendment. Typically, when things are added as an amendment and they pass, they're generally probably going to pass the full board when it gets to the end. That generally speaking. So
got you. Okay, we generally do friendly amendments a different way, but so we would vote for the addition of the major transit stops for Eureka and Arcata first, and then do this vote.
right, and you can also do another amendment for the other language as well. Not you, but somebody could. And then you basically, if those two pass or one or the other passes, and then they're added to the main amendment, and then you vote on it and it's done. That's the way I've been doing it in other bodies. But it's usually faster, but obviously maybe it's not faster tonight. So see how it goes.
And if you look at the list, the only thing that we wouldn't have to vote on tonight is Fortuna's transit stop, because you got the county rep, Eureka, Arcata, just next month, I'll take it to the council somehow, explain it, we'll vote on it, and it'll probably come back here and go through. Because everything else on here is either Arcata, Eureka, or the county.
So I would like Eureka adopted today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I second that amending motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Can you have a motion on top of a motion, though? Yeah.
Yes.
Chair Johnson, can I ask a quick question? I just want to ask Mike, as our county rep, do you have any thoughts about the Willow Creek spot, or do you think just proceed with it?
I think proceed with it, because I don't think it's going to make a big difference in terms of the development of Willow Creek. So might as well just make policy consistent in this case. And if there's a freak out in Willow Creek, we'll deal with it. So. Which there won't. I can't imagine there would be.
So to clarify, can I amend and add Arcata to this so that it can come through tonight as well?
I did mention Eureka and Arcata, so
Great.
thank
okay.
you for
So, perfect. All right. And it's
thank you
been
for approving
seconded.
that. Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
It sounds like it's everybody but Fortuna, which I think is probably fine.
Yeah, procedurally, I'm a little confused here. I don't think you can't amend a motion that's on the floor in a way that that reverses it. It's essentially, they're saying adopt the full list tonight, whereas my motion was leave the purple portion and wait on the orange portion of the list. So I don't.
Which is staff recommendation, right?
I believe so, although it was kind of a qualified recommendation that staff was open to discussion and other ideas, if I read it correctly.
Yeah, correct. And again, the staff recommendation is that only for the standpoint of wanting to make sure that we do due diligence and everybody is on board, and that we do it in timelines consistent with how we would make other changes. But again, there's no reason stopping or amending or changing the direction that this board can take here. So it really is up to this board. It's up to the discussion here, and we can move forward appropriately in either setting. I guess I would, it seems like there's some good discussion and some good general direction. I would think, maybe going through and getting some votes on some of these motions could provide some clarity there.
There is also the potential for you to rescind your motion and reintroduce it with the exclusion of Fortuna.
Yeah, I understand that.
That
but
may be simpler.
I really can't do that in good conscience, because I'm a person who, my career was applying the importance of words, what they mean, the hierarchy of what's a strong word, what's a weaker word. And I just can't, it seems very arbitrary to me to triple the number of a class of things that are considered major without a good explanation of what has changed since we did this in 2023. Other than, well, this would allow us to get to a goal that's a good goal. We support this goal, so we're going to sort of disregard the fact that these are supposed to be major stops, and we're just going to do it anyway. So,
Can I add some additional context about why these are major now and why they what has changed since 2023 around transit? Because these are related to transit numbers. Our ridership has increased significantly since 2023, so I don't know if that helps. 2023 there was a pretty stark division. These are still lower ridership than the initially 7 designated stops, but transit ridership has continued to grow. In the COVID really had an outsized impact on transit. So 2023 was a time when we saw even more bifurcation between stops that had a lot of ridership and stops that didn't. So we are seeing increasing ridership on an ongoing basis. I don't know if that helps to understand the return of users to the transit system. Is that useful? I don't know if any.
possibly.
Okay.
But I don't see any. By what percentage has transit increased overall since 2023? Transit use.
I don't have the percentage in front of me. I could probably do a little back of the napkin math looking at ridership stats, but it might take me a minute.
I guess because, see, in my mind, it's like they can't all be major. If every stop is a major stop, then major doesn't mean anything.
In this case, I believe major is not major as you are thinking of it, as what the state has defined a major transit stop as.
Or as we define it, we have to have some criteria that, is based on something.
Well, the criteria is that it's 50 stops or more, 50 passengers or more.
Or 1%.
Yeah, and that's like Mayor Burgell.
I propose we do a substitute motion under Robert's Rules of Order. And I will, while your motion is pending, I move that, and it's right here if you'd like to look at it, I move to substitute a new motion, which is that we adopt the major transit stops, all with the exception of Fortuna, with the motion as staff recommendation, if that makes sense.
And I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second on the substitute. The substitute goes first. It's right here.
Now,
Call the question. We don't have a parliamentarian on duty tonight, I don't think,
well,
in the form of legal counsel.
there was an amendment made to your motion, does the mover and the second accept the amendment?
He said no, and that's why I put forward the
Okay.
substitute
Then we
motion.
go ahead with a motion on the floor.
No, we do not.
And see
We do
what
not.
goes.
So let me read you, if we shall, since we don't have somebody on site. Let me get it back up here. And I will read you Robert's Rules of Order on substitute motions. Substitute motion. A substitute motion under Robert's Rules of Order is a form of amendment that replaces an entire main motion or a paragraph of it with new language. It is a primary amendment requiring a second and is debatable. It acts to replace the original proposal, requiring a majority vote to adopt the substitution.
I don't mind going ahead and going forward with that. However, I would hesitate, and just if Arcata and Eureka both want to go ahead and move forward with it, then I'd be more accepting of that. But I think that moving it forward for everyone would be my only concern.
It's only, I believe Supervisor Wilson said that Willow Creek was good. Supervisor Arroyo mentioned that McKinleyville was good. Is that correct?
That was the input from the planning and building director.
So, I mean, if you want to just change it to Eureka Arcata, that's fine with me. But it sounds like we've got input from two county supervisors that it's okay to go forward. And with Fortuna, we understand that that's something that he wants to take back.
Yeah, so I doubt if we, as a body, adopted Robert's rules in word for word. I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that have done that. Everybody adopts some form of it.
Sure.
But I have no objection to the substituted motion being voted on first. We have to get this moving somehow.
Yeah, through the chair, there was one other item that was of discussion, which was the issue around the process or the analysis done, for funding. Mm-hmm. And there seemed to be some, and so from that perspective, I'm just wondering, when does that happen in this process? And again, I do agree. I don't think that that the HCOG's whatever charter specifies Robert's Rules of Order, but we can use it. I don't have a problem with that. But I do want to get to the part where we have a motion that's related to the again to whether or not we're gonna have that same analysis that used to be in our process before, which was whether or not the funding meets our policies.
Well, let's wrap these stops up before they go away again, and we can come back to that.
And I don't have a motion formulated for that, but we could do a straw poll and see if there's interest in doing that. And if there isn't a majority interest in retaining that policy, then we can move forward. I'm happy to sort of wrangle that together if that's possible.
Chair Johnson, I do believe that we have to have a vote on replacing the original motion with the substitute motion. So we would need to do that.
Okay, so we want to have a vote on Mayor Pro Tem Kenny's motion to, Mayor Burgell's motion to substitute for Mayor Pro Tem Kenny's motion.
I don't think that's correct. I think that you vote on the substitute motion.
Well, she may
first.
have
I have it right here in front of my face.
I know, but I'm saying
right
she
here
may
too,
have
so.
HCOG's rules of order there.
Okay.
Because that's part of her job. So we have a motion now to adopt all the transit stops by Mayor Burgell and seconded by,
With the exception of,
I know, I'm getting to that.
okay,
And seconded by Mayor White to adopt the transit stops except for Fortuna's. And that is in substitution for the motion brought by Mayor Pro Tem Kenny. So we need to drop Mayor Kenny's motion and vote in. This is not the vote for her motion. It is the vote to move on with your motion, I
no,
think.
it's the vote for the motion
Is
that
it?
I made, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
We're on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's been the motion, there's the second, and there'll be the vote on that motion over
Okay.
the original motion.
And I just want to say that, I mean, because we aren't going to vote on whether or not to retain the policy that we had before, I'm going to vote no on this motion because I don't see any other way of pooling the board whether or not we're going to retain that policy. So
isn't that included in the staff motion?
no.
What I would say also realistically for the motions as it pertains to how to finalize the plan, the motion could be amended to say, I move to adopt the RTP per the direction provided to staff, something along those lines, and adopt resolution 2026-04 when that motion comes up. So direction to staff to make the amendments as desired by the board to be included in a final document could be included by reference in the final motion. There's a lot of ways to get there, I think.
Evidently.
Yeah.
I figured we'd just do a second motion for the
And-
funding
and-
consistency and get this and done and out of the way.
And I believe that would be acceptable as well.
Okay,
Well, what
so
is
long as we
the-
get a motion to bring back that policy after this and it's at least voted on, I'm happy to vote for this current motion.
Okay. So are you calling for the question? Or are we having any more discussion?
I think we've discussed it, I believe. I'm just want to call the motion and the question and vote on it as to whether we accept these transit stops this evening and get that done except for Fortuna's. Go for it. So, as the motion by Mayor Burgell and seconded by Mayor White, all in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
Aye.
No?
So 2 noes.
So we had 2 noes and the rest yays. So the motion passes. So now we come to the funding, fiscal analysis, funding consistency. And do you have anything you want to bring up about that? Let the look back or anything?
No, I think, there's been some discussion. And again, we just didn't feel like at the last meeting that the discussion was robust or comprehensive enough for staff to make the interpretation on what the direction of the board was. So I'd say, we're happy to move forward however the board would recommend. If the board would like that policy reinstated, I think the key thing to clarify about that policy is there's the funding analysis itself, and then there's that follow-up discussion that routinely comes in and out of HCOG, which is the, prioritization, stuff like that. If the board elected to bring that policy back in as part of, work in the coming year, staff would work on bringing that funding analysis back. The last time that was completed was in 2023, and we'd move on from there. So I think, we're really just looking from direction from the board on what you want to see in a final document.
Through the chair, I'm ready to make a motion on bringing back that policy. I think the comments from the public were relevant in that we have these goals and policies, and even if our funding decisions don't align with them directly, we should be at least informing ourselves about how much or how we're not doing meeting those policies, both equity and climate and everything else that's in there. So from my perspective, I think it's a good analysis. It's a good check. I would like to make a motion to bring that policy back.
I'll second.
Okay, well, at the same time, is there any questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I take a differing viewpoint there. I think we need to retain enough flexibility, and I think the existing protocol allows for that, because we usually act after a long series of recommendations up the chain, and if we feel that a certain project should get more recognition or priority because it, in our opinion, better fills certain aspects of the criteria, that we can at that point say, well, we reject essentially the staff's recommendation or the policy or the technical advisory committee, and we adopt it. This is what we want to do. I think that's sufficient, and we don't. There's no reason to tie our hands any more than we have to. So I would be in favor of the other approach.
And I'll just say, as a point of clarification, the policy for the funding consistency analysis is an analysis that would be brought forward again to the board and to the TAC that really kind of shows, the projects that have been funded, and is really kind of that tool to foster potential further discussion. So the policy is kind of that step one piece. Any direction that the board would like to provide after that to change, a method for doing the project funding decisions or prioritization, that would be a follow-up step that would come out of the policy's initial action. So, the funding consistency analysis, again, is a deliverable that could be brought forward to the board, similar to bringing forward like the safe and sustainable transportation targets, another thing like that. So just want to be clear that next piece of it would be a potential follow-up item at a separate direction from the board after a funding consistency analysis, or at least that's the intent of the policy as it's authored and how it would potentially be reinstated.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? That's as each project comes forward, right? No.
I don't quite follow the question, I suppose.
Apparently I don't either, so.
There's, for clarification, there's certain routine cyclical funding cycles that happen, like the State Transportation Improvement Program, where a suite of projects across the region come forward, and those come through every 2 years for review and consideration. And as it pertains to the follow-up item in the policy for prioritization, that's largely the funding source that is thought of in that particular way. But again, the policy is really more geared toward that initial consistency analysis that is that backwards look at the discretionary funding and where it was applied and what types of projects it was applied to. And in some ways goes, again, part and parcel with like the baseline safe and sustainable transportation target research that was done as part of the update for the RTP. Again, really trying to put to numbers where, the suite of regional projects is moving the performance of our transportation system. So.
Yes, Mayor Brigel.
So, just simple. So will it inhibit flexibility on projects?
Reinstating the policy would not. Reinstating the policy would provide the expectation that we're going to report to the board and to the TAC previous funding decisions again, similarly to what was done in 2023. If the board would like to provide any direction, or they would like to have further discussions with a working group with the TAC or anything like that, that would be a follow-up item to something like the funding consistency analysis.
So there's still
That could be it.
opportunity for us to speak on changes or any kind of flexibility. So this does not inhibit flexibility on working with projects.
Correct. The
But
the policy is for that step one, and then I think what causes some confusion sometimes is the funding consistency analysis, and the language there instantly gets lumped in with that greater discussion, which would effectively be a follow-up. But if the board chose to reinstate the policy, it would act as having us as staff bring back a funding consistency analysis, and there would be follow-up discussions, and the board would have every opportunity to, think thoughtfully on what that looks like, or to workshop it through discussion items, or to workshop it through an ad hoc committee, any number of outcomes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair Johnson, I just want to take a moment to share a thought. I've been, I don't know about you all, but I've been really feeling the weight of the deaths of pedestrians and bicyclists in particular, but also the driving related deaths that we experience, the DUI rates, the outcomes of all roadway users in our community are bad. We do think about these documents as, I think, what they kind of, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but I think we do have a tendency to look at them as what they do for our jurisdiction. And I certainly come here and think about what it does for transit and how it helps to advance our goals. But the big picture that the RTP lays out is really a vision that I feel very, very strongly about, which is why I'm so expressive in these meetings. And I appreciate you all for being here in it with me. And I think what this boils down to with the consistency is really looking through that lens of safety for all roadway users all the time, even if it means that we have to weigh other priorities against those. So I so appreciate that the public has weighed in on this and that we're talking about this. I really support the proposal to bring this back in. And I wanted to connect it to what we're experiencing in this last few years with the sobering number of injuries and fatalities. And the sad reality is sometimes that drives funding too. And so when we find ourselves in the situation where we receive funding because our safety outcomes can be at times poor, I just hope that we are really using every element of this guidance to make those decisions. So I support it. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Well, we have a motion and a second. And
state the motion again.
Supervisor Wilson. I'm gonna
I
restate
think
the
the motion
motion.
is just to return the policy that was removed associated with review of our funding against our climate and equity and other policies, related policies. I don't have it in front of me, but I think staff understands the direction. And I want to say I do appreciate Councilmember Jorgensen's and Pro Tem's Kinney's perspective on this. I don't think it's lost necessarily. I think our differences are pretty narrow in this case. But sometimes we have split votes, and whatever it is, that's what happens. And so, anyways,
Thank you.
Staff, do you understand the motion more or less? You got the direction?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we have a motion in front of us to reinstate the funding analysis, fiscal analysis, funding to the RTP. So with that, we say all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
And
Okay.
I'm an aye.
Okay. So the ayes have it here.
Chair,
And
one.
I appreciate Supervisor Wilson's note that the noes are not overlooked, they are noted. So,
I just wanted to also say I appreciate the healthy Discord discussion and debate. It's really, really inspiring.
thank you. All right, where in the heck are we now?
We still need 2 more motions.
All right. So we have one more motion to make, don't we, for the
We have-
environmental?
We have 2.
2.
Yeah, so I will clarify that covers the additional direction that staff was hoping to seek in a final draft. But I'll just provide that for clarification, and then note we still have 2 motions, one for the CEQA addendum number 3 to the 2013 EIR, and one for the final RTP, which of course would include the motions that have already been made by the board insofar as they pertain to those other 2
All right.
items.
So we need a motion to adopt Resolution 2603.
I would so move if you're ready for the motion now.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion in front of us now and a second to adopt Resolution 2603 to certify Addendum 3 to the final environmental report for the Humboldt Regional Transportation Plan 1314 update. So all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we have adopted Resolution 2603, unanimous. And now we need a motion to adopt Resolution 2604. It's the second motion on the page with the staff report.
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2604.
I'll second that.
We have a second, Supervisor Arroyo. So we have motion to adopt Resolution 2604, adopting the Regional Transportation Plan Variety and Rural Options of Mobility 2026 through 46. All in favor? Aye.
Just
Aye.
for
Opposed?
just for clarification, do we need to open that up to the public, or do we not need to do that for the resolutions?
I fell asleep on that one.
I believe public comment on this item was already covered.
I believe we had a lot of public comment on this item. Okay. So that
Sorry, was
brings
that a
us-
unanimous yes?
Yeah, that was unanimous. So that brings us to, by motion, we will reconvene as the HCOG board, and at that time, we approve the PAC recommendations. So can we get a motion to reconvene as the HCOG board?
I'd like to make a motion that we reconvene as the HCOG board.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? None.
Aye.
So that, again, was unanimous. Okay. We have the executive director's report.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. So I do have a few quick items I would like to report. As the board may have seen, we did receive on February 12th our determination from Housing and Community Development that they concur with HCOG's RENA methodology, or at least in their words, they found that it furthers the 5 statutory objectives, which in their words means they have approved it. We have issued notification to local agencies that we are initiating a supplementary 10-day appeal period with a 10-day comment period on the tail end of that. That's just to satisfy the requirements of the statutory code that covers RENA. So we have issued that right now. this isn't supplanting the public appeals period we also put forward sooner, which we did receive the appeal from City of Eureka. So with that transmittal, just a few updates I would like to share. We will hold an appeal hearing on our next regularly scheduled HCOG board meeting on March 19th. So that'll be to review any appeals received. And of course, we have received the one. And then on April 16th, staff will bring forward our draft regional housing needs plan, which will include any final decisions as a result of the appeals process as well. So just a little bit of schedule and update there. One last item I would like to note, because it'll be coming to the TAC and to the board in March. HCOG staff, we did receive a formal letter from the McKinleyville Community Services District requesting consideration to be added as a TAC member seat. And we have received some other supporting letters for that. So just FYI to all the board members, we'll be taking that request to the TAC at their next regularly scheduled meeting on March 5th. And that'll be coming up to the board at the 19th for review and consideration as well. So with that, I will hand it back to the board for reports. Or I suppose to Caltrans, sorry.
Oh, yes, Mayor Burgell.
I heard you mention our appeal. Is there anything about that yet?
No, that'll be part of the process. We are required to provide at least a 10-day appeal period post receiving HCD's determination. So we'll receive that, I guess just for full order, so you know. We receive that, they will get posted, and then there's the ability for other jurisdictions to comment on said appeal if they feel so inclined. And then this board will consider the appeals as part of an appeal hearing on March 15th. Which ideally will provide direction on a path forward. And with that, we as staff will bring forward, an analysis of the appeal, and some of the outcomes or allowances that the board could consider as part of an appeal process. So that's something we're working on as staff, and we'll bring forward, options or recommendations that the board can consider as part of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our executive director? Okay. And with that, we'll move on to Caltrans reports.
Hi. The Broadway Complete Streets project, the concrete work is almost done. There's still some work to be done at the Pearsons intersection along the northbound lanes, including the bus stop and 2 curb ramps. All of the below ground electrical work is now complete, and the planting is almost complete. We're waiting for warmer temperatures at nighttime for the microsurfacing, and then 1 week later we'll complete the striping. So this is likely to happen in June. So the signal at Hillficker will come active at the same night that we do the striping. So again, in June. That is unless we get lower temperatures in the evening. For the Indianola interchange, the remaining tasks needed to open Indianola are removal of the 4 median crossovers between northbound and southbound 101, and then some electrical work. This work is also planned for completion in June, and the electrical work and traffic signal installation at Airport Road is scheduled to begin in June. Some funding opportunities. The guidelines for the Prop 4 Urban Greening Program were released recently. Funding will be awarded in 2 competitive cycles with just over $46 million available for the first round and $100 million in total over the next couple of cycles. Solicitations for round 1 open in spring 2026, and grant amounts are between $200,000 and $5 million. So the program supports nature-based solutions, including expanding green spaces to serve as refuge during heat waves, creating green streets for clean stormwater capture, and helping communities become more climate resilient. Clean California headquarters announced round 3 of the Clean California Grant Program, and 8 applications in District 1 were funded, and 5 of those in Humboldt County. The program predominantly funded the litter abatement and workforce development efforts, with awards going to City of Arcata, City of Eureka, Humboldt and Mendocino counties for beautification of public spaces, including the Great Redwood Trail Corridor. Hoopa Valley Tribe award also funded, the removal of abandoned vehicles, and Trinidad Rancheria's award will support educational cleanup events and 2 new part-time positions, among other things. The district transit plan, A draft engagement strategy and existing conditions will be released at the end of February or early March. Engagement will begin in April and continue through July. And last, and the annual Caltrans Tribal Summit. This year's summit for Humboldt and Del Norte counties will be held in Eureka on May 27th at the Bear River Band of Ronaville Rancheria. And the dates are going out soon with more information. So, thanks.
No, thank you. And PAC member Arroyo.
Thank you. Definitely a few things from HTA. As I mentioned, we are working on that, outreach and operational scheduling for 30-minute headways on our trunk line and some streamlining of stops. So there's, going to be some trade-offs there, but I think ultimately it'll serve all riders a lot better. People will, I think, be more willing to try transit if they know, all stops are served every 30 minutes. And it'll be, I think, a big improvement and consistent with some of our plans. Our data on performance of and stats of ridership is usually a couple months behind because it takes some time to process that data. So we have close to end of year data for 2025, and I wanted to share some of the highlights with you. We do have earlier and later service to quite a few stops on the Redwood Transit line, including Southern Humboldt. So we've seen some increases in use in those areas. Eureka has stayed just about the same, but it's always been pretty strong, Eureka Transit. Everything else pretty much has grown. So we're seeing a 30% year over year percent change in ridership, 30% increase from last year, from 2024 to 2025. And a big increase in cash fares, which was interesting, such a Humboldt thing. All the other transit agencies around the state are like, wow, people still pay for transit with cash there, huh? But I think when we standardized our fares, in most places, fares are now $2. And so the flat $2 even was really easy for folks to use cash. And so we've seen a big increase in cash fares. Also seen an enormous increase in the Jack Pass, which is, the students have had it for a long time. But now one thing I learned recently, I thought I knew a lot about transit, was that the Jack Pass didn't used to apply to all routes. It was just Arcata and RTS at one time. So now students can get anywhere by using the Jack Pass. And so we've seen an incredible uptick as well with Arcata Mad River Transit of 118% year over year, which was far and away the biggest increase. Although I guess if you count the North State Express, which is our route that goes all the way to Ukiah for $2, then that might be considered the biggest increase, but they're neck and neck. So those were some all good things. We're currently serving your year-to-date ridership is looking like it'll be just shy of 400,000 riders. Pre-COVID, we were looking at more 600,000 and up. So still working to rebuild to those levels and exceed them. I did also want to note that just because I think it's interesting to see what other agencies are doing, Humboldt Transit Authority did go to a 4-day work week for all employees. So taking a page from our friends in Fortuna, I think we get to be the case study for how that's working for different agencies. And so it required some reshuffling of, driver schedules and maintenance schedules and all of those things, but it's for office staff, drivers, maintenance personnel, et cetera. So everyone in the agency. So if anyone's curious about how that's going, we'll be able to report back after we give it a little time to just adjust. I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Any other board members have a report? Well, with that, I think we've reached the end of the evening. Thank you all, and we will be adjourned.